Hello, Blake Rudis here with your ON1 inspiration. Hudson Henry and I decided to go on a trip to Moab to do some scouting for maybe some future workshops. And it was absolutely incredible. I mean, this series is called an inspiration series, right? And I cannot tell you just how inspired I was by this location. As a landscape photographer and someone who prides themselves in just going on adventures and having some fun, this place, it's a playground for phatographers. It really is. I'm dumbfounded by the amount of photographic possibilities that are there. And it's one of those places that I haven't stopped thinking about since we went to. It's always on my mind. Those red rocks and blue sky, red rocks and blue sky, red rocks and blue sky. I just can't get it out of my head. And it was really great going with Hudson because while I do a lot of workshops, the workshops that I do aren't quite as much an adventure as they are when you go with Hudson. So just to give you a little insight as to how our trip went. So things happen when you go on a photo trip, and Hudson and I were supposed to be at Moab probably around 2:30 the first day. So we were going to go and we were going to scout locations for the Milky Way because Hudson said, "Hey Blake, the Milky Way is going to be great. We're going to have to shoot some Milky Way stuff." Hudson knows a lot. He really taught me that I wasn't wearing the right clothes for adventure photography ever. He taught me how to use an app called Sun Surveyor so that we knew when to go and shoot for the Milky Way. So anyway, we were supposed to get there at 2:30. Our flights got canceled. We ended up having to drive from Denver all the way to Moab, which is about a 5.5 to 6 hour drive. But we didn't have an option if we wanted to get there on Monday, So we drove from Denver all the way to Moab, and it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of talks and a lot of chats, but we didn't get until 11:30. So Hudson says, "Hey Blake, 3:30 is when we're going out to shoot the Milky Way." And I'm like, "Dude, you gotta be kidding me. I'm not waking up in 4 hours." He said, "No, take a nap. We're doing it." So we did. We woke up at 3:30 and we went and we shot the Milky Way. But we didn't know where we were going. So we looked at the map and we saw that Balanced Rock would be a good place because it was right off of the road. So my tip to you, if you're going to be going to Moab, is to really look at those maps first. Download some ebooks on the locations from photographers that have shot it. Not just regular books about Moab, but from photographers. It really helps. We got some incredible shots of the Milky Way over Balanced Rock and just the Milky Way in general. It was just glowing so well. Not a whole lot of light pollution that was happening there, and we could just really see all of that gaseous dust in there. It was absolutely gorgeous and incredible. But a part of that too is going through the park and shooting these things in the daylight. So you can see here we've got Balanced Rock right here. Back here we've got Turret Arch. This was at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but the light still looks great. I would discourage anyone from saying, "I won't ever shoot between the hours of 9 o'clock in the morning and 4 o'clock in the afternoon because the light's horrible." Well, you're right, the light's not the best, but at the same time, you can still make some great images. And I think you're only hurting yourself by not going out at those times. So we did a lot of scouting. This is the Oregon, beautiful place to shoot to. I mean, really, you could spend a whole week at one location here and really get, that right light coming off on the side of the Oregon, shooting it from different angles. It literally is a playground. It's phenomenal. It's gorgeous. This is the first place that you actually come into. It's called Park Avenue. It's a nice hike between there. We didn't do a whole lot of hiking. We did the front side and the back side because you can drive to the back side. So, but again, gorgeous place to shoot. Red rocks, blue sky. Red rocks, blue sky. I'm gonna say it's a very inspiring thing to see. And Hudson here, man, he was a very fun person to shoot with. Always very helpful too. It's one of those things that when you go and you shoot with someone, sometimes it can be intimidating shooting with somebody else, especially if you're both in that pro nature of photography. But Hudson, he was very helpful. "Hey Blake, check out this shot." And I was the same way. "Hey Hudson, check out this shot." We were sharing our shots and just having a good time. But one of the things that I also did was I'm a very super wide shooter. I love wide angle lenses. But one of the things that I did this time was I had my Sony a6300, which I call it my sidearm camera, and I had a 70 to 200 millimeter lens on it. So at any time while I was shooting with my wide angle on a tripod, I could be maybe a faster ISO, zoomed into 200 millimeters, and taking really detailed shots of the park with that 70 to 200 on. And you really get to see the character of the park when you do that. The red rocks, the blue sky. It's right there. It's gorgeous. Here's another shot of another arch, turret arch. Arches National Park is arches. It's got tons of these natural occurring arches that are all over the park. Gorgeous, gorgeous shooting environment here. Just the different scenes that you can get, the different shots that you can get. This is the same turret arch at 10 millimeters here, and then a little bit closer, a little bit tighter, looking through the other arch on the other side. Again, another one of turret arch, walking up to it with more of an artistic take on the processing here. Another one of turret arch with the Milky Way over top of it. And this is interesting because we did a lot of moonlight shooting because we had a full moon during the time we were there. And just as everyone else was leaving the park, Hudson and I were just starting our photo endeavor. So we would basically go out at 3:30 in the morning, shoot the Milky Way. We'd go get breakfast and then take naps from about 10 o'clock until about 12:30 or 1 o'clock. We'd eat a quick lunch, get in the cart to go scouting for our evening location, shoot until about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, go back into town, get dinner, then put our images onto our laptops and our storage devices, take a nap, and get up and do the Milky Way all over again. And we did that for 3 days straight. But what we got there was these moonlight shots. And if you wait till everyone else leaves, because everyone else is like, man, I'm hungry, I'm going, I'm getting out of here, I'm done shooting, sunset is gone. But you can have a lot of fun with that moonlight if you have a decent amount of moonlight coming through, because some of the shots can almost look like daylight with the amount of moonlight that's coming through, and it's stunning. This is double arch. This is double arch also, but it's looking the other way. This is double arch looking towards double arch. Here we went to Mesa Arch. We didn't just go to arches. We also went over to Canyonlands, and it was difficult to try and do both. And what we realized was that if we were ever going to do a workshop here, we'd probably just need to do a workshop of arches. This is Mesa Arch, the famous arch over in Canyonlands, and we didn't go in the morning. We went in the evening, and there was nobody there. This place is usually swarming with photographers, but there was nobody there in the evening, and you can still get some very nice sunset shots over there at Mesa Arch. The light's kind of on the opposite side, but it's still a gorgeous place to photograph, even for sunset. Here is another look at Mesa Arch. I was shooting with a Voigtlander 10mm lens, so I got some really interesting wide-angle shots. But another thing is that you also want to make sure that you look at the intricate things in the landscape. You don't just photograph Mesa Arch. This is at Mesa Arch, but if you take a walk about 25 to 30 feet away from the arch, there's this beautiful tree that's just resting on the side of the cliff that sees things that the arch doesn't see from a different angle. So, take the time to walk around the locations that you go to really get that inspiration. Here's Hudson doing a panoramic of Mesa Arch, and he's a dedicated panorama photographer. He does a very good job with his panoramics too. Again, I learned a lot about panoramic photography from Hudson during this trip. Here's another one at Mesa Arch, just off in the distance, little tree that just sits there. Take these types of shots in your landscape work too. Don't just take those giant wide angle shots. Take the time to get deep into those locations. Another shot of Mesa Arch as the sun was going down, just to prove that you can get some pretty darn good light on Mesa Arch at night in the sunset. Okay, because now instead of the underneath side of Mesa Arch lighting up from the sun coming up, we have the sun setting and lighting the other side and casting some very nice magenta over there. But by far, our last location was Delicate Arch, and it was phenomenal. It was beautiful. Delicate Arch in Arches National Park. We're going to jump back to Arches now. It's a beautiful place to photograph because Delicate Arch is like the king of the arches. It overlooks the entire park. Again, another place to wait until the people leave. All around my camera that you can't see that's happening kind of over here and over here are hundreds of people and photographers that are enjoying the scene with me. But at night, as soon as the sun was setting, everyone decided to take the hike back down to their cars. But Hudson and I stuck around. We were the only two photographers up there sticking around to get the moonlight at Delicate Arch. And we could go wherever we wanted and not really worry about impeding on anybody else's shots. It was great. It was absolutely phenomenal. Again, another instance where you can almost make moonlight look like daylight. This was before we hit the moonlight, but you'll see that these are my wide-angle shots that came from my A7R II, and this was from the A6300. Again, taking those detailed shots, the time to look at it and say, you know what, Delicate Arch has a little bit of a hair problem today. It's got some hair sticking up there. You know, it's all gelled nicely over here, but the hair is sticking up on the side. But just take the time to look at the scene through a longer lens like that. Again, making moonlight almost look like daylight over the whole experience of Delicate Arch. The beauty of Delicate Arch is this is the view from Delicate Arch. Over here you see Balanced Rock. Over here you see Turret Arch. The whole park can be seen right up there from Delicate Arch. It is the king of the arches. And some of these are just more of your detail shots, just looking around the park, and not necessarily the things that are written on the signs, but just looking at the overall landscape of the whole place. It's absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things that you're going to come across here, one of the issues that you might come across here, is some post-processing difficulties. What I showed you there was all my processed images. We're going to hop over into develop, and I'm going to show you some things that you might encounter as difficulties during the process of shooting in some place like Arches National Park. So what we're going to do is just start off by making the overall scene look a little bit better. Okay, so we're going to brighten this up just a little bit, by about, maybe half of a stop. So 0.5, 0.55 will work. We're going to come in here and look at our white point and our black point. So I'm going to click on the histogram, and I'm going to press J as I move my whites and see where my whites start to clip. Okay, if they start to get really bright right around here, I want some more detail in those whites. So they clip right here where it starts to turn red. Pressing and holding J is showing me that. But I don't want them to clip. I want them to come and move their way down here so that we get a little bit more detail in those mountain range in the background. So anywhere between -15 and -20 will work right there. I'm going to press and hold J and look at my blacks. I'm going to open up those blacks. I'm going to see where they start to clip, and they start to clip around the -7 or -8 range. And what that means by clipping is if we look at the histogram, those are areas that are like pure black. And that's okay to have certain areas of pure black like that. I don't mind those areas being pure black like that. So I'm going to bring those down so that I can set my black point and my white point. That means that we're setting our darkest darks and our lightest lights. And in doing this, if we were to set our lightest lights and come over here, we're going to be blowing out those highlights and losing some highlight detail back there. So I'm going to bring this down to that -17 range. And from there, I can modify the highlights. So I'll usually hop down here to the whites and blacks first, and then I'll look at my highlights and see what I can boost in my highlights, which is an overall adjustment rather than moving the whole white point over. It's expanding the highlights from the midtones towards the whites instead of moving the whites in the histogram. And then I'll take the shadows and I'll look at those and see what I can do with that. Bring those down to about -10. Again, this is sometimes it's just what my eye likes. I like them to be a little bit darker in those shadow regions. And that looks pretty good up there. So I'm also going to come down here and look at the structure. Now, structure is interesting because structure is kind of like contrast. If you move contrast over, contrast gets really dark. It makes our darks darker and our lights lighter, and it does it in tone and color. So as we move this up, our darks are getting dark, but our colors are also starting to get more saturated. So I'll bring that up to about the 8 point. If we move the structure over, the structure is kind of like contrast, but it's in those very minute details. All right, so we're going to move that up a little bit to get some of that detail back, because sometimes when we modify these adjustments, we lose some of that minor contrast in those minute areas. So I'll just bump that structure up to anywhere between 8 and 10 or 7 and 10, whatever looks best to your eye. In doing that, though, we might be losing some of the purity in those highlights. Or when you look at the highlight purity here, I'm just moving this over to see what happens when I move it all the way over to the right. Sometimes we get some impurifications that happen in those highlights, and our highlights get a little squished or they get a little over contrasty. By moving this over, we can maintain the integrity of the initial highlights before making all these adjustments. These are actually pretty important sliders here because we can do the same thing with our shadows here. Just move it all the way over to see what happens. We almost get like a drop in vibrance because we're maintaining our shadows so much, and more like on the tonal level than on the color level, but I'll move that up a little bit there in the highlights and the shadows. One of the biggest complications that I wanted to show you here, though, is in the local adjustments, okay? Because we have red rocks and blue sky. But what do we have right now? We have mildly orange rocks and a dull drab sky. mildly dull rocks and a dull drab sky. But throughout this whole inspiration, I've been talking about red rocks, blue sky. It's always stuck in my head. So we're going to go to local adjustments, and we're going to use this masking little tool over here. I think they call it the masking bug, if that's its official name. And I'm just going to click right about here. And when I do that, it's automatically going to be set to -1. And it's fine to show that because it's going to show us a good idea of what our spread is going to be. So I'm not really going to take the exposure down this far, but it helps me adjust where I want this masking bug to affect. And so if I move this right here, that's going to move that up and down. That's going to manipulate where this masking bug affects. And if I bring this up, it's going to increase the feather a little bit. I'm going to bring that back to 0. What you'll notice that I do a lot is I bring things to the extreme to see what they're going to do, and then I pull them down and get them back to normal. And that's typically a very effective way to see what's happening with that adjustment that we're doing there, okay? Because if we just left it at -1, it's very difficult to see what's happening. But if we bring it all the way up, we see exactly where that thing is affecting, okay? So I'm just going to leave my exposure at 0. What I want to do is I want to exaggerate this sky a little bit. So I'm going to bring the temperature down in that sky pretty low. So about -130 to get that blue back there, okay? Really get that back. Bring that temperature down to get that blue back. And then I'm going to look at the saturation. I might bump up this saturation a little bit. Bring that up to about, the 20 mark or so. And then maybe even boost my vibrance a little bit back there to get some of that blue back. It's starting to look pretty good. I'm getting the blue back. Now, in the process of getting the blue back, my shadow's there a little dark. We can fix that up with some other adjustments here in a second. Maybe bring that down to the -110 mark. Between -110 and 120 will be all right. Well, now that I have this mask already set up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an adjustment for the foreground to get the foreground a little bit more on that orangish or reddish color. So I'm going to add a layer, and with this adjustment here, I'm going to click on the mask, and I'm going to select copy. Okay, so I'm copying this mask. I'm going to come up to this mask, and I'm going to press paste. So now I've got the exact same mask for what's happening below that what's happening above, but I need to invert it. So just go boom, invert. Look at that. Again, we're going to see exactly what's happening now. So we got that nice little spread between both of them, nice little feather between both of them. And this is, again, one of those reasons where I'm just going to bring that down to 0. And what I'm going to do first, I might come back and I might target some of this area. But I want to target, right now, I want to target how much yellow is coming through here. So I'll bring this up to about the +70 range. And then I'll look at the magenta that's in there. Because as I bring the magenta up, those rocks start to get a little bit more red. Okay. And then I'll bring the saturation up to see if I like that. I'm going to mess with saturation somewhere else, but I like that for now. Then I'll play with the highlights here. Really want to crunch down those highlights here in the foreground area. So I'll bring that down to about -60 or 70 or so. You can look at the follow along PDF and that'll give you the ideal settings that I'm using here for this. So I've got my red rocks, I've got my blue sky, they're almost there. What I need to do is come back over here to the overall settings. And this is where things get interesting. I always talk about tone and color, tone and color, tone and color. What I've really just done here is I've set up my tone in the initial side, and I've set up my color for the color and the white balance. But I can take color a little bit further. And how I'm going to take that color a little bit further is I'm going to go into this area here where it says show more, and I'm going to get a color adjustment. Because what this color adjustment is going to do, I'm going to just take the tone and color here and just hide it for now. This color adjustment is going to allow me to get into each one of these colors in this image in a much more intricate manner. Okay, so I know these rocks right here are in the orange range. So I want those orange rocks to be a little bit more red. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and bring this down and make them a little bit more red by going down to between -7 and -10 will work out all right. I'm going to bump up the saturation a little bit in them, and then I'll even look at the brightness. So how bright are those rocks? Maybe I'll bring that up a little bit. And then I'll look at the range, because range is an interesting thing here, and you can't really see it here, but when we get into the yellows, you'll definitely see it. So I'll bring up that range a little bit, and that basically means that it's selecting more orange than just the regular color selection for orange. Let's go into the yellows and I'll really show you this. So in the yellows, I'm going to bump up the saturation here. And you see that in the yellows, what that did was that bumped up the saturation in the little foliage there. Let's bring the greens up. Now we can really see where yellow is being affected because we've bumped up yellow, we've turned it pretty much into green and increased the saturation all the way. Watch what happens when we move the range though. look at how as we move that range, our yellow selection starts to get broader. It starts to get bigger. And it starts to say, well, these are our yellow selections, but this is also slightly yellow. So as you move this up, you're getting a bigger selection for the color yellow in the image. Now, I don't necessarily want that big of a selection for the color yellow, so I'm going to bring that down to about, the negative 15 mark. I also don't want them to be that green because that's like a vibrant electric green. And I also don't want them to be that saturated, so I'll bring that down a little bit too. But you see how effective it can be when you bring up your adjustments to the maximum to see exactly what's being affected so that you can taper them down and bring them down a little bit. Okay. And we'll also bring up the brightness a little bit in that yellow area there. And then we'll also go into our color blue because we do need to modify that a little bit there up in the top. So if I move the saturation up to its peak and then look at the range, you can see that pretty much whether it's at range 0 or range 100, all the blue is really existing back here in the back of the image. So I'll go ahead and bring that saturation down to about the 9 range. And then I'll also look at making a little bit more cyan to complement those vibrant orange rocks a little bit more. So bring that down to about anywhere between negative 12 and negative 17 should work. Negative 15, negative 20, however you want to look at it, should work. And then we'll look at the brightness of those blues because it looks like those blues are a little too bright. And when they're so bright back there, our shadows get really blue, and I don't like that. So I'm going to bring down that brightness to around the negative 30 range. And that's going to darken down those blue areas a little bit more for me. So if we look at this, here's our overall before, and here's our after. We're starting to get more of that red rock, blue sky kind of idea, but we can push it a little bit further, and that's where we go into effects. So right now, I've got my workflow down. I've got tone done. I've got color done. Now I can move into what I call artistic effects. Always do that same workflow: tone, color, artistic effects. And I'm going to do those artistic effects in the effects panel. So we're going to switch right on over to effects. All of our develop settings stay the same. We can even hop back into develop after we're done with the effects if we'd like to. I'm going to put one of my favorite filters on there called sunshine. Okay, so let's just go right here, add a filter, and click sunshine. So by default, I don't really mind the way the sunshine looks, but I'm going to go ahead and manipulate some of these settings. I might bring the glow down a little bit, and I might bring that warmth up just a little bit more in that glow, and I might bump down that saturation just a little bit. Might even bring up the glow just a little bit more. I'll go to the extreme and then bring it down to a point where my eye likes. But I'm also going to look at what I'm applying this to, because what I realize is when I look at the eyeball here, or the check mark here, I turn the check mark on and off. Okay, I don't like what it's doing to my highlights. So what I can do is I can just say, you know what? Reduce that filter effect on the highlights there. Just protect those highlight areas from what's happening in here, and that works out for me. I might actually just turn this check mark off just to see what's happening, and maybe bring down the opacity a slight bit too, to about the 80% range. Somewhere around there will be fine. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then we'll go to add filter, and I'm going to add one of my other favorite things, which is a split tone. And the reason why I add a split tone, it's not just doing it just to do it. I never do anything just to do it. I do things for a reason. So when I click on this split tone, I'm going to use the oats. The reason why I do these split tonings is because anytime you affect the colors in your image in a way where you're modifying the blues, and then you're modifying the oranges, and then you're modifying the yellows, things can get a little out of hand. You need some type of unification over the entire image. And that's where split toning can be very effective. So if we change our split tone over here to this oats color, I really love the way this oats looks because it gives me kind of a sepia tone overlay over my entire image. If I bring this up, this is basically what's happening is we're adding this color peach to our highlight areas. We move this up, we're adding this color red to our darkest darks. And that's basically what our split tone is happening here. But when we bring the amounts down, the amounts are how much of that is actually coming through. And I don't want a whole lot of that to actually come through. It's actually a very mild amount that comes through there. So about right there works for me. If I turn this off, turn it on, what this is doing is it's unifying the entire image. And from here, I can come in and I can maybe just drop the opacity if I wanted to. Maybe it's coming off a little too much. My blues are now no longer blue in the background. I might just drop that opacity a little bit. But to have that overall split tone that just lays right on top of the image, I think it looks really great because it ties all the colors together very well. So if we were to pop back into develop now, all of our settings are still there. If we were to notice that maybe our shadows aren't looking like shadows anymore, they're opened up a little too far in the dynamic range, we can come in here and just drop that shadows down a little bit, and so on and so forth. And you might ask, well, why would you even do these color adjustments and then go over to effects? Why don't you just jump into effects? Well, look what happens when we take away the color adjustments. We lose our blues, we lose our red rocks, we lose that nice magical feeling that the Arches National Park has. So again, here is our before, and here's our after. So our trip to Moab was absolutely fantastic. We had such a blast getting to know each other, Hudson and I did. And I think even more so, we had more fun getting to know the Arches area. It really is a magical place. I can't really explain it beyond that. Very inspirational for a landscape photographer. Now, if you ever get the chance to go on a workshop there or just visit it by yourself, I'd say jump on it in a heartbeat because it's phenomenal. It's absolutely gorgeous. So again, my name is Blake Rudis with this ON1 inspiration video. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. I sincerely appreciate it.